Okay, good afternoon. I've been involved since the start of this project in a couple of different ways. The working group I was involved with was tasked not just with reporting progress along the way and these end products, but also some of the inter-team coordination along the way, and it's really been a pleasure to watch this incredible group of researchers do their thing. And I have heard every single possible type of jargon. You could not have almost a more difficult project to translate for the public because, I mean, you've seen the words that people have been using and they're very familiar to you, but they're not to a lot of the people who should be, if they aren't already, caring about the results of this research. So from the start, CEA had the foresight that they needed to get the results of this study to wider audiences. That was always a goal. So built in from the beginning were two different report deliverables. One, a technical summary, which is kind of like a compendium and outline for all of the detailed effort reports, but also a stakeholder focus report, which was probably going to be really different in format and content, but we didn't really know what that was at the beginning. So we've had to develop a vision for that, and I'm able to talk today, towards the end, about the draft that we have of that and what we're going to be doing towards the end. So cost-benefit analysis of retrofits for homes is a major barrier. Our lack of information about that is a major barrier to getting people to be interested in retrofitting. Okay, so the question that CEA was asking in this study, the answer matters to whether or not people want to retrofit, and it's something that we haven't really known very clearly. During this talk, I'm going to show some of the thinking that we've tried to use to take best practices from risk communication field and how the PR team has been using them to produce these stakeholder-driven communication projects. So here's a framework that I use for thinking about how to develop a stakeholder communication product. These are steps that don't necessarily always occur in this order. There's a lot of iteration going on. But I believe that risk communication is best done as a deliberative, collaborative, iterative process, and you have to have all 6 of these elements to really do a good job. So involvement is not just your scientific interdisciplinary team, but involving your audience, and ideally that should happen from the start to the finish and with some check-ins throughout. Things work better if you do it that way, but even a little bit of stakeholder involvement at a couple of points along the way can really help. My talk is going to focus on the middle part of this spectrum, this progression, the goals, audience, and format, because that's where best practices can really help you move more quickly from your ideas to a vision for your project. But we don't want to ignore the beginning or the end, because those are the things that are often missing. It's just we're not in a good position today to talk about those because of the timeline of the project. So I'll hopefully circle back a little. Let's begin with goals. What are your objectives? Defining and clarifying goals is so important because that is how success is defined. That's the benchmark against which you're going to be measured. If risk communication is deliberative, then we are deciding on our goals, and that is what we're going to measure our success against. There might be a spectrum of objectives, so they're increasing in complexity. The first one, sharing information. Our goal is to educate. The next step up is to change beliefs by persuading and convincing. That's harder than just informing, right? And we measure how well we've persuaded by measuring what people believe before or after they see the information. It's hard to do that. You have to do surveys and interviews and get inside people's heads. We're used to doing that in marketing. We're not used to doing that in our usual science projects. Changing behavior is kind of the capstone. It's the goal. But it's not a goal that you can achieve only through your project. Changing behavior has a lot to do with relationships, social context. We don't have as much control of that in a project. So from the start, we knew that we were working with CAA primarily on an educational project for stakeholders with the hopes, the aspiration that it was going to lead to changed beliefs and potentially changed behaviors. So who is the audience? This is often the first question that anybody who's reviewing a risk communication project wants to know the answer to. Who are you trying to talk to? Well, working with the funder and CEA, our team, I like to call this a stakeholder mapping. And it tries to put people's brainstorms about everybody they'd like to influence in some kind of format where we can break it apart, choose and target. So the axes are how technically familiar is the audience with the subject that you're going to be talking about. Do you start from zero with no understanding of the issues, no understanding of the remedies you're talking about, maybe down with homeowners or lenders, to the experts at the top, the research engineers, okay? And on the x-axis, we have receptivity to new information. How actively are they already seeking new information? Some people are waiting for it. Not a lot, because in this question, people don't know to ask for it. They don't know they need this information. We actually have two communication goals. First is to convince you to pay attention to the topic, and second is what you want to tell them about the topic. So this was kind of a cluster. The exact location of these dots in this cloud don't matter as much as getting your brainstorm in this kind of format so you can start to unpack your assumptions and narrow in. So we were building this project on that ATC 110 P111 report, which was targeted on retrofit design. And this is where I saw those products being targeted, yeah? But we had our technical report, which needed to move into new terrain, more into applications, and people were waiting for that in the industry. So we have, in some sense, an easier path to those readers. Everybody has a huge list of aspiring audiences for their stakeholder reports. But consider the difference in knowledge level and motivation between a lender and a CEA insurance partner. You might call those part of your stakeholders, but think how differently they are positioned vis-a-vis your topic. From the get-go. It's pretty ambitious to try and cover all that in one single publication. So we tried, through extensive discussions, we focused in on a band in between the more technical audiences and what you might truly call a lay audience that isn't focused on this issue at all. This is where we felt we had a good chance of reaching and influencing. So we had to say no to making a pamphlet for homeowners. That doesn't make sense for a research project. That's where we struck the balance. So when you go to think about what you want to tell your audience, you need to start with what they know, because that's what they're going to build on. So what does the audience currently think or do? A lot of those audiences we were looking at have some knowledge of the problem. So we weren't going to start at ground zero why you should care about home retrofits. We think they're starting a little bit further in that conversation. We don't have to start with what's the hazard. What is at the heart of what we want them to know? Well, we didn't actually kind of know that until the end. The punchline is just arriving here. And we've been shaping recently, what do we want the receiver to do with that information? Again, we're kind of focused on education, but we want them to connect with the material that we put in this report. Connecting is about personalizing this study and generating emotion about the results of this study. Conclusions is about getting key facts across, so they might actually know something they didn't know before. Remembering is about the impression that you make on the people and the format also affects memorability and interaction with the material. Telling other people has to do with your product producing surprise or feeling important to the people. Those are some examples of why telling others might be something that you want someone to do after they've read your material. And almost number one, I would say, is generating curiosity so that people search for information, because your product itself is not really going to change what they do. What you want is for them to take the next step. Okay, that's why you often have those additional resources sections at the end of stakeholder reports, because you're trying to show them that it's possible to do something about this, and we're trying to make the next thing easy for you. So if I had to prescribe one tip in risk communication product design, it would be to design around the audience's goals. This flips on its head the communication paradigm that's used throughout science as in our professional work and how we communicate as scientists between ourselves. We need to shift ourselves into a receiver-focused mode where we're thinking about what does the receiver of the information want and how we can use what we know to help them. This is not about dumbing down. This is about carefully selecting from what you know the things that are most relevant to their goals. So that's, if you dumb down, you're going to shut the conversation. But if you select, you're going to open the conversation because you're choosing what among your things is most relevant to them. It's also about something called plain speak. So not dumbing down, the buzzword for using plain language is plain speak, and there's great guidances for how to do that. And here's some examples of how we tried to do that in this project. I was charged with the acronyms and glossary task for this project, and wherever possible in these final products, we're trying to just shift to more common language. Cripple wall is just one, we need to get away from talking to that about people for a variety of reasons. I guess people like it because it kind of scares people, but they don't know what it is. So if we can use a little more familiar term, lateral, what is it? Okay, it's plywood, and yes, we have to sacrifice a little on detail, but we're gonna make a lot more progress with people understanding. Anchorage is always one that gives me a chuckle. And empirical is just one of the worst words ever. There's others, mitigation, retrofit. We kept the word retrofit, okay? Mitigation's out. But one of the reasons why we're educating is we can use a little bit more sophisticated vocabulary to raise people's understanding of the problem up, and retrofit is a word we want them to know, even if they don't know what it is. We just want them to understand that a retrofit is not a retrofit is not a retrofit. So we're adding one little dimension, brace and bolt retrofit, so that we separate it from chimneys, so that we separate it from what you do with your bookshelf in the hallway. So you keep a few of the pieces of jargon that you need them to be more sophisticated in their understanding about in order to take action. So sometimes that means taking a simple word that's really vague, a word like loss or damage, and you need to elaborate on it. So it doesn't always mean going simple. Sometimes you're playing that balance there. In a research report, we really have to balance how much we talk about the problem, how much we talk about our project, and how much we talk about what we think people should do based on our results, that prescription. So this is hard. If you don't talk about your project, you're excluding 99.9% of everything you've done. But I don't find these pictures particularly motivating. They don't look like my house. I don't know what they are. What the hell is that steel beam doing on top of things? That's not an earthquake setting. You just really have to leave out a lot of what you've been thinking so deeply about, and that's quite challenging. So in the format department, you're trying to make everything on the page pull as much weight as possible. Icons are wonderful, and I talked about emotion earlier, giving an impression. Like, those little houses are cute. I feel good when I see that diagram. It feels accessible to me. It's easily understandable what I'm talking about. I don't have to say it's 1 or 2 story. The picture does the work for me, okay? The colors on the side don't do any work, they just distract. Why are the bullet points 100 different colors? Maybe it gives you an impression of variety, but maybe that use of color is just distracting. So when we have a results diagram, we're trying to pull together as much as we can. We're using pins that reflect map locations to help us show distinctions between different regions of California. We're using vertical height to show size and relative size. We're using the icons. We're scientists, we have to do that due diligence of explaining all the caveats, but we have to accept that a lot of details. What does the big one mean? We're just going to hitchhike on what other people have in their mind, and yes, that might be a variety of different things, but it's about right, and it gets us where we need to go the fastest that we can. So currently this is a work in progress. We have a 4-page draft of our stakeholder report that is now in the works to be reviewed. And the title that we settled on was the brace and bolt benefit, because bottom line, that's what people want to know out of this study. What is the benefit of doing a retrofit? We're educating them that one more step. We're talking about a brace and bolt retrofit, and the benefit is big. So we're going to describe it for you in our result read on. Our next step is back to involvement and iteration, more with our team, more with CEA, who has a lot of deep expertise in their communications department, working with how to get this information across in the best way possible. Thank you for listening to this talk on a slightly different subject, but I think it's really, you can see why it needs to come at the beginning and why it also needs to come at the end, because it's really vital to get the incredible work that's being done into the hands of people who can make better decisions with it. Thank you.